U.S. Senator Bob Menendez just resigned after being found guilty of accepting gold bars, wads of cash, luxury cars, and all kinds of other gifts as bribes to do the bidding of the Egyptian and Qatari governments. A U.S. federal court found him guilty on all 16 of the charges he was facing, which include bribery, obstruction of justice, acting as a foreign agent, and now Menendez, who's 70 years old, faces up to 222 years in prison in what's being described as one of the most high-profile and brazen corruption schemes in recent congressional memory. As one prosecutor put it, his years of selling his office to the highest bidder have finally come to an end. The case speaks volumes about how the Senate Foreign Relations Committee works and the double standards around how it decides who are the foreign agents. So what did he do? The essence of it is that Bob Menendez used his position in the leadership of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to secure business and weapons deals for the Egyptian and Qatari governments and protect their agents from prosecution. Menendez held positions of leadership on the committee for almost a decade, first as a ranking member and then as the chair from 2015 to 2023. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee handles legislation pertaining to U.S. foreign policy and deals with matters like foreign aid, weapons sales, confirmations for the State Department, and so on. It's an incredibly powerful committee, which made Bob Menendez a very powerful senator. As the leader of the committee, he had the power to approve and deny huge foreign aid and weapons shipments to allies. Congress started withholding authorization for Egyptian weapons shipments after the election of Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who turned Egypt into a complete police state and maintains power through widespread human rights abuses. Bob Menendez used his position to start approving these weapons sales again, despite objections from his colleagues. So how does something like this start? In 2018, Bob Menendez started dating his current wife, Nadine. When they started dating, Nadine introduced Menendez to her friend of many years, Wael Hana, nicknamed Will Hana, someone she knew was an agent of the Egyptian government. They have dinner, and at this very fancy restaurant they're eating at, they work out a deal where Bob Menendez will approve weapons sales for Egypt in exchange for his girlfriend getting a job where she gets paid to do nothing at Will Hana's company. Menendez then proceeded to act as an agent of the Egyptian government, doing things like sending highly sensitive information about employees at the U.S. Embassy in Egypt to members of the Egyptian government, disclosing non-public information to Will Hana about Egyptian weapons bans, getting talking points from Egyptian agents on why Egypt should receive weapons shipments, and even ghostwriting letters for the Egyptian government that were being sent to other U.S. senators to persuade them to release a hold on $300 million in aid. He also tried to steer the U.S. Secretary of State's negotiations around the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, one of the most important foreign policy issues for Egypt. As more requests came in, the more gifts Menendez and his wife got. Here are pictures of some of those gifts taken during a raid on Bob Menendez's house. He had $500,000 of cash stuffed in jackets around his house, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gold bars, a Mercedes bought for them by an Egyptian agent. Not pictured are house furnishings, appliances, a $20,000 mortgage payment that the Egyptian agents made on the Menendez home. Nadine usually acted as the middleman between Menendez and the Egyptians, sending requests to Bob and then passing the information he gave to the Egyptians. She would also frequently complain when money wasn't coming in on time, and would twist Bob's arm to get them to send money faster. The Egyptians were sending money from Will Hana's halal certification company to an LLC that Nadine had set up for the purpose of this deal. At one point, the U.S. Department of Agriculture tried going after Will Hana's company because their company was acting in a way that hurt the interests of American businesses. So what did Menendez do? He called the USDA and told them to stand down. In 2020, the Menendezes expanded their operations and became agents of the Qatari government. They helped one of their associates land a multi-million-dollar business deal with a company tied to the Qatari government in exchange for more gold bars, expensive watches, tickets to the Formula One Grand Prix. You get the idea. The grand irony of all this is that as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez spent most of his career accusing other countries of the exact kind of corruption he was engaged in. Here he is saying that Russia is trying to undermine our democracy.
Anyone who tries to undermine our democracy, who in essence created a 21st century attack through their cyber attacks against our democracy, is a foe.
Here he is comparing Venezuela's president to Al Capone.
Because given Maduro's track record, given that he makes Al Capone look tame, there can be no return to normalcy with this regime.
Here he is saying that Cuba is trying to covertly influence US politics.
I think it should be pretty appalling that a foreign government would be engaged in trying to affect an election and or the position of a United States Senator.
Mind you, in that clip, he was actually deflecting accusations around another corruption scandal he was involved in by saying he was set up by Cuban spies. And finally, here he is accusing China of, wait for it, bribing leaders of other countries in exchange for political favors.
Debt trap diplomacy, where these countries become hostage to China, not only economically, but then in a transactional basis, China says, well, you can't recognize Taiwan anymore. Or China says, you have to vote with us at the UN in the way we want, or at the UN Human Rights Commission.
As Americans, we're constantly being told that there's this looming foreign threat, whether it's the threat of terrorism or communism. In the last 2 decades alone, the US has bombed 7 countries to allegedly stop terrorism. But in all the years since 9/11, there have only been 366 Americans killed by terrorism. Compare that with, say, the approximately 700,000 Americans that die every year of heart disease, and it becomes pretty obvious, pretty quickly, that the so-called terrorism threat might actually be a cover for the fact that we spent tens of trillions of dollars fighting these wars, which just happened to give rise to an entirely new generation of multimillionaires and billionaires that made their entire fortunes through war. And the craziest thing is, the exact kind of lies peddled by Bob Menendez are the ones that are being used right now to justify this foreign policy of world conquest that kills millions of people. For example, these accusations of rampant corruption in Venezuela are now being used to justify the US-backed coup in Venezuela that's happening as we speak. The AIPAC talking points that Bob Menendez peddled as a PR job for Israel are used on a regular basis to justify more money being sent to their genocide, and now even a regional war with Iran. Menendez's lies about Cuba are routinely used to justify the universally condemned economic blockade of Cuba. So what the Menendez corruption case really proves is that we don't know if anything Congress tells us is true. For all we know, they could be regurgitating talking points from some lobbyists that bought them a car. And it's not just Menendez either. The Clinton Foundation stole money from the Haitian earthquake relief effort. Joe Biden got his son a no-show job on the board of a Ukrainian gas company even though he had no experience. His son also sells these bizarre paintings for tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not really sure if there's some artistic vision I'm missing or if it's just a cover for money laundering. And how about the fact that the Bush family openly did business with the Bin Laden family? Or that Nancy Pelosi has become so synonymous with insider trading that it's become a running joke and traders follow her stock trading as a legitimate trading strategy? How else did she end up being worth $240 million off of a congressional salary of $200,000? Is it an agreed upon fact that an untold number of US politicians were part of or looked the other way for Jeffrey Epstein's human trafficking blackmail ring?
So I'm going to shoot straight. The perception between a lot of young people is that there is an untouchable ring of governmental and economic elites in this country that not only benefit, like she mentioned, but actively participate in sex trafficking. Jeffrey Epstein was an example. Robert Kraft was arrested not far from here on trafficking charges. Are these power players a priority for us right now? Can we even touch them? Or is this a pipe dream that we need to address in the future somehow?
You know, it's like everything. It hides in plain sight. Epstein was hiding in plain sight. We all knew about him. We all knew what he was doing.
These crimes are so heinous and corrupt that it can be hard to believe at times. But consider the fact that these people do the most heinous and downright psychopathic things that harm millions of people in broad daylight. They killed over 1 million people in Iraq over a lie to finance their vacation homes. They funded armed militias in Libya to murder the sovereign leader of that country and plunged it into civil war just so they could increase their shares of Libya's oil and gold reserves. Anyone responsible for doing that probably has no qualms about committing financial or sexual crimes. The point here is that all of this contradicts one of the most fundamental things we're taught in this country, that America is a meritocracy or land of opportunity, meaning that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or how little you have, that if you work hard, you'll be rewarded. America is not a meritocracy. Some of the hardest working people in this country, people that work 2 or 3 jobs, 60, 70 hours a week, live their whole lives barely keeping their head above water. Meanwhile, the most talentless, sleazy, selfish people run everything. In fact, the only thing we can actually conclude from this is that the system doesn't reward hard work, that it rewards corrupt behavior. And the reason for this is, in a system where everything is for sale, aka capitalism, even public policy and the morality of our government is for sale, and the ones most willing to sell their souls rise to the top. So as we enter the election season, and the Democrats try to convince us all that the Republicans and Trump are some kind of den of corruption and that they don't care about the people at all, just remember that Kamala Harris is bought and paid for too. Her donor list reads like a who's who of Wall Street bankers, and her top advisors are a lawyer for Uber and 2 former heads of BlackRock. So if you've ever felt like it doesn't matter who you vote for or who gets elected, that's because it largely doesn't. The 2 parties actually pit us against each other by driving wedges between us on a few select issues, but when it comes to endless wars, bailing out the banks, letting big tech and big pharma write our laws, mass surveillance, giving more money to the police state, supporting Israel's genocide, the 2 parties are quite literally indistinguishable. The problem isn't this or that politician. It's the whole capitalist system, which, to quote our New York prosecutor friend in the Menendez case, operates simply by selling political power to the highest bidder.